Upton
on BBC WM 95.6.
Yeah, I only bought the fancy mojitos because they were on offer. That's why it was happy hour, right? And once the happy hour ended, I went back to the proper drink. 8 minutes to 7 o'clock it is. Very good morning to you if you're just waking up. It's Monday morning. Phillips and a breakfast here with you through until 9:30 on BBC WM. Hopefully you can stay with us right the way through. Until then, traffic and travel from Johnny Palmer coming up before 7. Next story this morning deals with students at the University of Birmingham. They're launching a legal challenge after they were banned from holding sit-in protests. Last year, students, you remember, took over an abandoned building on the campus at Birmingham University in protest against the £9,000 a year tuition fees. Now, the university has got a High Court injunction to stop the students staging an occupation. Hattie Craig is a student at the university. She's been involved in the protest, and she's live with us in the studio this morning. Morning, Hattie.
Hello.
Thanks for coming in this morning.
Hi.
What's the university done then?
Well, after a protest in an abandoned building in November, they decided that they were going to get an injunction out which effectively banned any occupational protest across the entire 250-acre campus.
So, obviously, you wanted to carry on with those protests, but bottom line was you were disrupting university life, weren't you, by doing that?
Not really. What we wanted to do was make it clear that we were using a space which wasn't being used for educational purposes anyway. We hadn't been sitting in lecture halls or disrupting seminars. This building was effectively unoccupied. And what we wanted to do was create a space where we could open a dialogue, where we could have workshops and discussions and speakers in to educate people about the changes to higher education, because we don't feel that this discourse is being provided at the university.
But the university have said, you know, they don't object to peaceful protests, but it will not let you occupy buildings for days, weeks, months at a time.
Well, this is an entirely peaceful protest. There's no violence involved, and it's a perfectly legitimate form of protest. We weren't disrupting anyone. It was a completely unoccupied space. And we don't think that the injunction's appropriate. And we're not the only ones. Amnesty International and Liberty have both condemned the injunction.
If it was so peaceful, why were the police called?
Well, the university has a history of cracking down very hard on these forms of protests. I mean, there are 21 other occupation-style protests at universities across the country.
So there's no need to call the police. The university were being too excessive.
They were being too excessive, that's very true. The police weren't necessary, and the police actually did very little at all in the situation. They were there more as observers than anything.
Right. This is private land. Bottom line, isn't it? Belongs to the university.
Well, the university is a public institution and we want it to remain that way. And what we're protesting against is the universities being turned into this kind of privatised institution. We believe that university should be for everyone and should be publicly funded. So I think it was very appropriate that we were using this building in such a way.
Let me bring in Gavin Williamson. He's the Conservative MP for South Staffordshire. Hattie, you want to put some headphones on, and then you can hear Mr Williamson respond here. Gavin, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think about the university's move, then, to get an injunction on this?
I think I obviously start off by pointing out that I'm not a spokesman for the university, but I think the university is wanting to ensure that it can deliver its curriculum, it can deliver the studies for all its students, and it's got to take a mature approach in ensuring, because we have seen some institutions and some places, whether it's St Paul's Cathedral, where effectively people who want to go about their business, whether it's going to worship, have basically had that disrupted. And I think the university taking a mature approach, make sure that all its students are going to be able to continue to use all its facilities. But one thing I think is absolutely critically important is that the university equally respects the rights of people being able to make a protest, but actually work with them to make sure that they can make their democratic protest, their voices heard, but ensure that it doesn't disrupt the work of the university. Let
me bring that back to Hattie Craig then. There you go. An MP saying you've got perfect right to protest. No one's arguing against that. Just needs to be done in a more controlled environment.
I think the problem is that with the breadth that this injunction covers, it's very hard for the university to define what constitutes as an occupational style protest. So, for example, if we had a protest on campus where we stood there for more than an hour, does that count then as an occupational style protest? I mean, and I think that the problem is then this is going to be so much easier for the university to bring in, say, police and security and trying to prevent any form of protest with this wide injunction, which isn't specific to particular protests, but just as a blanket ban.
Gavin Williamson, the bottom line is this has all been about the student fees, isn't it? Will these protests actually make any difference?
To the student fees, no. I think what is going to make a difference is actually having a proper dialogue with university authorities, with politicians. Constituents come to see me all the time, have a proper dialogue, have a proper discussion with people. And I think the university is absolutely, totally clear. It's not trying to stop protests, and I certainly would be the greatest defender to make sure that everyone has the right to protest. But what it's wanting to do is to ensure that its campus is able to be used by all students, whether they want to take part in any protest or students that don't want to be involved in any protest whatsoever.
And Hattie Craig, the fees are changing. These protests aren't going to make any difference, are they, one way or another? What happens next for you?
Well, the thing is, this isn't just about the fees. I think this has been widely misrepresented. We understand that the fees have already come in and that it's £9,000, and we understand that there's quite little that we can do to change this. However, there are much wider issues going on within higher education than just simply £9,000 fees. We're seeing the marketisation of higher education coming into effect. And originally that was presented in the form of a white paper. However, there's now been discussion about whether this is to be delayed till 2015. And we're very worried that the government is instead going to push through this privatisation without it going to democratic discussion.
Okay.
And the problem is that we've got to keep on protesting against this. We don't want profit to become the centre of higher education. We want students to remain the centre, and we need an unbiased, publicly funded higher education system for this to remain.
Hattie Craig, student at the university, thanks very much indeed for coming in this morning. Gavin Williamson, Conservative MP for South Staffordshire, thanks very much indeed. And there'll be more on this issue of the students at the university who are launching this legal challenge after being banned from holding sit-in protests tonight on Inside Out on BBC One from 30:30 from now. 20 to 8, students at the University of Birmingham have been banned from holding sit-in protests inside campus buildings. The university managed to secure a High Court injunction after a group of students occupied a building in protest against tuition fees of £9,000 a year. Just half an hour or so ago, we spoke to Hattie Craig. She's a student at the university and she's been involved in the protests.
We disagree with the changes that are happening in higher education at the moment. We're angry about the fact that they've tripled the amount that universities can now charge. We wanted to show them that despite the fact they had this injunction, it wasn't going to stop us from continuing with peaceful protest.
The students are trying to get the injunction overturned. Tessa Gregory is from the Public Interest Lawyers in Birmingham and she's represented them. Thanks for coming in this morning, Tessa. Appreciate it. What exactly has the university banned then? Because they've not banned protests, have they? They've just banned this form of protest. Am I right?
Well, that's right. They've banned any students from entering onto the entirety of the campus for the purpose of carrying out an occupational protest. So we think that the terms are wide enough to prevent any kind of stationary protest on campus, so not necessarily just within buildings.
Right.
Like you said, it could say you could stage a sit-in protest in a car park, and that could be caught by the terms of the injunction.
So you can march, you can move, you can be mobile, but actually one stationary protest will not be allowed under these rules.
That's right. That's right. And it's against unknown defendants. The university have indicated that they're only going to try and enforce the injunction against those students who took part in the occupational protest in November, which was a peaceful protest. It only lasted 48 hours and it was on a disused building on campus. But the difficulty is they don't know which students took part in that protest, so they've also indicated it could be enforced against any students.
Okay. There have been protests since then, though, and those weren't stopped, were they?
Well, so we understand, but what this allows is the university, if it wants to try and enforce the terms of injunction. And so they're really saying without their prior written consent, students can't protest, and if they breach the injunction, they're in contempt of court, which is a criminal offence. They could face imprisonment or fines.
Has this ever happened before? University ever done anything like this before?
Not as an injunction, as far as I'm aware. And universities have obtained possession orders, which seek to regain possession of university buildings after an occupational protest has taken place, but not one which prevents protests taking place for a full 12 months. This is what I think we could call a super injunction that the university have managed to obtain.
And how much negotiation is taking place between the students and the university before this has gone as far as it has, getting all the way to the High Court? Do you think the two parties have done enough negotiating in this?
Well, not at all. This is what was quite shocking, because we were instructed by the students within 12 hours of the occupational protest starting, and within a further 8 hours the university had instructed solicitors to go to court without notice to try and obtain the injunction. And we were not instructed to impose the injunction because the university had threatened those students taking part in the occupation with disciplinary proceedings.
We sometimes, in all of this, we sometimes forget, don't we, actually, what this is all about education. The university's job is to educate, is to provide research, and these protests really get in the way of that, don't they?
Well, I don't think so. I think universities ought to be a forum within which students can express different ideas and can debate the big political issues of the day, and that's exactly what my clients are trying to do. They're serious-minded students concerned about the white paper in higher education, expressing concerns about the privatisation of the higher education system, and universities ought to be the forum in which they can express those concerns. They shouldn't be instructing commercial solicitors to seek injunctions.
Tessa, could leave it there. Tessa Gregory from Public Interest Lawyers in Birmingham, who's representing the students. More on this story on Inside Out tonight at 7:30 on BBC One. If you want to take a look at that, it's 7:30 tonight on BBC One. 16 minutes to